In the deepest folds of Appalachia, where the mist hangs heavy and the old ways never truly die, ancient darkness stirs. I've walked those hollers, and what I found will make your blood run cold. My name is Thomas, and I've spent years digging through the forgotten corners of these mountains, piecing together tales the official records tried to bury. Deep in the ancient hollers of Appalachia, where the morning mist clings to hillsides like the breath of sleeping giants, there exists a darkness that predates the first European settlement by centuries. A darkness that has festered in the mountain's belly, growing stronger with each passing generation, feeding on the desperation of those who dare to make bargains with forces beyond human understanding. In the harsh winters of the early 20th century, when coal mines ran dry and families faced starvation, something stirred in the deepest caves and shadowed valleys. Something that had been waiting patiently for the right moment to extend its influence beyond the confines of stone and shadow. What emerged from those depths wasn't just another religious movement or backwoods congregation. It was something far more sinister, far more dangerous, and far more lasting than anyone could have imagined. The stories I'm about to share with you have been deliberately hidden, sealed away, and whispered about only in the darkest corners of Appalachian folklore. These aren't your typical spiritual communities. These are cults that embraced practices so disturbing, so fundamentally wrong, that even hardened mountain folk who had seen their share of violence and hardship would cross themselves and change the subject when their names were mentioned. What makes these particular cults so terrifying isn't just their isolation or their willingness to commit unspeakable acts. It's how they wove themselves into the very fabric of their communities. How they convinced ordinary people to participate in rituals that would make your blood run cold. And how their influence continues to seep through the mountains even today, decades after their supposed dissolution. You see, the Appalachian Mountains have always been a place where the old ways never truly died, where ancient superstitions are mixed with Christian theology to create something entirely new and often entirely dangerous. The geography itself contributed to this darkness. These weren't just remote communities. They were isolated kingdoms where charismatic leaders could establish their own twisted versions of reality, where outside law enforcement rarely ventured, and where the very landscape seemed to swallow up anyone who asked too many questions. The first cult I uncovered emerged from what locals called Whisperwind Hollow, a bowl-shaped valley where the wind carried sounds in unnatural ways. The Echo Mound congregation, as they came to be known, was founded in 1928 by Brother Silas, a gaunt, reclusive man who had spent his life as a grave digger, intimately familiar with the silence of the earth. His rise coincided with a devastating flu epidemic that swept through the isolated settlements, leaving behind a trail of grief and unanswered prayers. Silas began preaching that the mountains themselves held the echoes of the dead, that the departed weren't truly gone but lingered as spiritual vibrations, waiting to be heard. True communion, he claimed, was achieved by tuning oneself to their unending lament. The congregation established their compound around a massive, ancient burial mound believed to be pre-colonial. New members underwent an initiation called the Deep Listening, where they would be led into the earth's deepest caverns and left in absolute darkness and silence for days. Most emerged changed, their eyes vacant, their movements hushed, speaking only in murmurs. What made the Echo Mound congregation particularly chilling was their focus on children. Silas believed their young minds were more porous, more capable of absorbing the echoes. These children were kept in the deepest parts of the caves, emerging pale and silent, moving with an eerie, synchronized sway, as if guided by an unseen conductor. The cult's practices grew more disturbing. Monthly, they'd gather in the mound's central chamber, using ritualistic bone fragments to pierce their ears, believing it opened them to the ancestral hum. They claimed to absorb the collective pain of generations past, believing this would grant them profound wisdom. Local authorities first took notice in 1933 when whole families simply vanished. When deputies investigated Whisperwind Hollow, they found the compound eerily empty. The main burial mound, however, told a different story. Deep within, investigators found the walls covered in intricate carvings that seemed to vibrate, and the floor coated in a fine, iridescent dust later identified as human bone. Most disturbing of all, they discovered journals written by Silas. The entries detailed experiments in consciousness merging, describing how the echoes weren't just sounds, but the very essence of the departed, capable of subsuming the living. The final entry read, "The great hum is complete. They hear us now. They are us. We become the mountain's memory, eternal, silent, and ever-listening, the old one's feast. We have given them new voices." No trace of Silas or his followers was ever found, despite extensive searches. To this day, hikers and hunters around Whisperwind Hollow report strange acoustic phenomena, faint, sorrowful hums that seem to emanate from beneath the earth, and the distinct feeling of being watched by something ancient and collective. Sometimes, they say, you can hear a child's faint, echoing cry, deep within the silence. Next, we journey to the high ridges of West Virginia, where the Sunstone Brethren came to prominence in 1935. Their leader was Mother Aurelia, a woman who miraculously survived a mine explosion, emerging from the rubble with unnaturally clear eyes, claiming the sun itself had breathed new life into her. This was during a period of extreme drought and crop failure, and Aurelia preached that the world had lost its way by turning from the true source of all life, the sun. Its light, she claimed, held immense power, but only through selective shadow sacrifice could its true blessings be gained. The Brethren built their compound on a barren mountaintop, exposed to relentless sunlight. New members underwent light-binding rituals, long, grueling periods of forced sun exposure, often without water, designed to purify the body. Those who faltered were deemed shadow-tainted and subjected to public humiliation. Their most terrifying practice involved shadow feeding. Victims, often outsiders or dissenters, would be tied to places of perpetual shade, deep ravines, or the north side of massive boulders left to wither away, their life force supposedly absorbed by the earth to nourish the sun's hunger. Children were especially valued for light feeding. Young members would be exposed to the sun for days, sometimes weeks, without adequate water or shelter. The horrifying twist was that these children didn't always die. Instead, they became something else entirely. Pale, photosensitive beings with unnaturally large, glowing eyes that burned with a faint, internal light. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, avoiding all shadows, their skin a translucent white. Authorities were tipped off by desperate families looking for their missing children. When federal agents raided the mountaintop in 1941, they found no trace of Mother Aurelia or her main followers. The compound was strangely burned from within, not by fire, but as if the very light had consumed it, leaving behind only fine ash and the chilling silence. Local park rangers later reported groups of these pale, glowing-eyed children wandering the high peaks at night, their skin shimmering in the moonlight, always avoiding direct light. Legend says they are the true Sunstone Brethren, forever feeding on the moonlight, a horrifying testament to Mother Aurelia's twisted vision. From the sun-scorched peaks, we descend into the damp, shadowed hollows where the root-bound kin emerged in 1942. Their leader, Elias Thorne, was a former botanist who had lost his entire family to a devastating blight that swept through the region, leaving farmlands barren. Broken by grief, Thorne became obsessed with the resilience of the ancient forests, convinced that humanity had become estranged from the old growth, the primordial, sentient root system of the mountains. Reconnection, he preached, required shedding humanity and literally becoming part of the earth. The kin lived deep within an untouched old-growth forest, constructing their dwellings from intertwined branches and living soil. Their initiation rituals involved the consumption of strange, luminescent fungi that grew only in the deepest, most ancient parts of the woods, inducing vivid, disorienting hallucinations. New members were then subjected to earth burials. Buried alive under massive, ancient trees for increasingly long periods, their only connection to the surface, a hollow reed for breathing. The cult's true horror lay in their grafting rituals. They would cut sections of human skin and attempt to fuse them with the bark of trees, believing this literally connected their flesh to the old growth. Children, considered less tainted by modern life, were especially prized for root binding, their small bodies gently intertwined with young saplings and left to grow together, supposedly fostering a deeper connection. The terrifying twist, Elias Thorne's vision was horrifyingly successful. When local forest rangers investigated reports of missing hikers in 1948, they found the root-bound kin's compound abandoned. But the forest itself seemed unnaturally dense, its trees growing in bizarre, unnatural patterns. Digging near the former compound, investigators uncovered what appeared to be human remains, but they were not bones. They were bodies that had literally dissolved into the root system, their flesh and bones consumed and replaced by thick, fibrous roots. their consciousness seemingly spread throughout the vast, subterranean mycelial network of the forest. To this day, the section of the forest where the root-bound kin operated is avoided. Compass needles spin wildly, and those who venture too deep often report a feeling of profound disorientation, as if the forest itself is thinking, watching, and occasionally singing a soft, rustling chorus that sounds eerily like human voices whispering from deep within the wood. As the echoes of the root-bound kin faded, the mountains braced for the hard-edged doctrine of the Iron Covenant. Born from the economic instability and post-war despair of the 1950s, this cult was led by Jedediah Stone, a former blacksmith from Harlan County. Obsessed with the idea of forging the human spirit, Stone believed the world was headed for a great collapse, and only those whose spirits were hardened like iron would survive. He established his community in the ruins of an abandoned iron mine, its deep shafts and cavernous chambers serving as his forge. The Covenant recruited individuals broken by loss and fear, offering them a path to unyielding strength. Their core belief was that the human spirit needed to be purified through extreme physical and mental stress, hammered into an iron-forged will. Initiation involved brutal labor pains in the mine, forced to dig and haul beyond exhaustion. Then came the anvil trials, ritualistic self-mutilation and branding with heated tools, sensory deprivation in suffocating metal containers, and forge trials, where members endured extreme heat or bitter cold in isolated mine shafts. The chilling twist, the survivors of these forge trials returned fundamentally changed. Their skin seemed unnaturally tough, almost metallic, and their bones felt dense and heavy under inspection. They possessed incredible physical endurance, but their minds were brittle, prone to violent, uncontrollable outbursts, and their voices took on a harsh, ringing cadence like hammer strikes on metal. Authorities stumbled upon the Iron Covenant in 1957 after a series of inexplicable, violent deaths in nearby towns, attributed to individuals with superhuman strength and an almost inhuman lack of pain. When federal agents attempted to raid Jedediah Stone's mine, a catastrophic collapse occurred, sealing the entire complex. No bodies were found, only immense structural damage suggesting an internal, powerful force. Today, the mine is still sealed. Locals report metallic clanking sounds echoing from deep within the earth, especially on cold nights. Patches of ground around the mine remain unnaturally cold, even in summer, and some claim to feel an oppressive, heavy presence, like a vast, unyielding weight pressing down from below. In the social upheaval of the late 1960s, a new cult emerged from the valleys of eastern Kentucky, seeking true harmony in a world consumed by discord. The Veiled Chorus. Their leader, Sister Morwen, was a renowned opera singer who, after a sudden and tragic loss of her voice, retreated to the mountains and seemingly lost her sanity. She claimed to have discovered that the universe itself vibrated with a pure sorrowful chord, an ultimate lament, and that true transcendence came from aligning one's voice and spirit with this cosmic sadness. Silence, she declared, was the ultimate sin, a blasphemy against the universal dirge. The chorus built their sanctuary in a secluded hollow, its natural acoustics amplifying every sound. Their days were filled with constant, mournful chanting, endless vocal exercises that pushed members' voices beyond endurance, often damaging their vocal cords. The cult's most horrific practice was the silencing. Those who produced discordant sounds, sang out of key, or dared to speak against Sister Morwen were subjected to ritualistic mouth sewing, their lips meticulously stitched together with gut string, leaving them to live out their days in enforced, agonizing silence, a punishment for their supposed disharmony. Children were taught from infancy to sing only the lamentations, their nurseries filled with constant, low, mournful drones. The chilling twist, the voices of the most devout members, even after their vocal cords were shredded, took on an ethereal, echoing quality. It wasn't human sound anymore, but a collective, mournful drone, capable of inducing profound sadness or disorientation in anyone who heard it. Federal authorities investigated in 1974 after reports of pervasive, unsettling humming emanating from the secluded valley that left visitors feeling overwhelmingly depressed. The compound was found abandoned, but the lingering lament was palpable, a pervasive, low thrum that seemed to vibrate in the very air. To this day, hikers in that valley report feeling an inexplicable melancholia, and sometimes a faint, disembodied chorus can be heard, a sorrowful, unceasing hum that seems to weep from the very heart of the mountains out of the economic downturn of the mid-1970s. When many felt adrift, came the Saltblood Breakers. Their leader was Captain Alastair Vance, a former deep-sea sailor haunted by a catastrophic shipwreck that left him the sole survivor. He arrived in the landlocked mountains convinced that humanity was adrift from its true oceanic origin, that all life stemmed from an ancient salt blood hidden beneath the earth. Purification, he preached, involved returning to this primordial essence through extreme dehydration and the ritualistic consumption of highly saline solutions found in hidden underground pools. The Breakers established their sanctuary around a network of brine springs deep within a forgotten cave system. Their practices were brutal: forced dehydration for days, immersion in unnaturally saline underground pools that stung the skin, and ritualistic bloodletting where their own blood was mixed with the briny water and consumed. Children were immersed in these pools at birth, believed to be purer vessels for the salt blood. The chilling twist: the bodies of the most devout members, even after death, became unnaturally preserved. They didn't decay. Instead, they mummified due to extreme desiccation, their skin like cured leather, their eyes crystallized. They were eternal, incapable of true death or decay. Authorities discovered the Saltblood Breakers in 1982 when a local reporter, investigating a missing persons case, found their secluded cave entrance. Federal agents raided the system, finding dozens of mummified figures, some still breathing, barely alive, their forms rigid and preserved. But the moment fresh air touched them, they crumbled to dust. The underground pools were unnaturally saline, far more than any natural spring, suggesting a deeper, unknown source. The Saltblood caves were sealed, but whispers persist of the cult's eternal ones. Figures seen in the deepest parts of the mountains, their skin like dried earth, their eyes glimmering like salt crystals, still seeking the primordial brine. As the digital age dawned, fear of the unknown gave rise to the Clockwork Seekers in 1988. Led by Professor Alara Reed, a former horologist whose obsession with time led her to dismiss its linear nature, this cult believed that by dismantling time piece by piece, one could access past and future and achieve true timelessness. She drew followers who felt overwhelmed by the accelerating pace of the modern world, promising an escape from its relentless march. The Seekers established their compound in a remote, forgotten valley, filling it with elaborate, non-functional clockwork devices. Their rituals were meticulously structured, designed to unwind history. They would live in reverse chronological order, holding backward ceremonies, attempting backward speech, and deliberately erasing memories through traumatic experiences, believing this would reset their internal clocks. Children born into the cult were raised in a fragmented reality, their minds intentionally disoriented from linear time. The most terrifying practice was the rewinding ritual, where members were subjected to mechanical torture on elaborate clockwork contraptions, their pain precisely timed, meant to break their connection to the present. The chilling twist: the Seekers began to experience genuine temporal anomalies. They would appear and disappear, sometimes mid-sentence, speak phrases from different eras, and observers claimed to see multiple, ghostly versions of the same cult member coexisting in different moments. When federal agents finally located their compound in 1995, after reports of bizarre temporal distortions in the area, they found an abandoned museum of bizarre clockwork contraptions, but no people. The valley itself now feels off. Electronic equipment jumps forward or backward in time, and visitors report losing hours or even days without realizing it, caught in the temporal echoes of the Clockwork Seekers. As the millennium approached, fears of societal collapse and the fragility of the human body fueled the rise of the flesh weavers of Whisperwood. Led by Dr. Mordecai Gower, a brilliant but disgraced surgeon stripped of his license, this cult believed the human body was a flawed vessel. True perfection, he preached, came through flesh weaving, merging bodies and consciousness to create a singular, perfect organism, a communal being beyond individual weakness. In 1999, Gower established his commune deep within an isolated section of ancient forest. Recruitment targeted those suffering from chronic illnesses or physical disfigurements, promising them ultimate physical and spiritual wholeness. Their practices were horrific. Ritualistic amateur surgery was common, along with shared blood transfusions and communal living where personal boundaries dissolved. Children born into the cult were subjected to preemptive weaving, their developing bodies undergoing minor, disfiguring alterations from birth, preparing them for the ultimate fusion. The terrifying twist: Dr. Gower's experiments were horrifyingly successful. When federal agents, responding to Itwo thousand fears and strange reports from the region, raided the Whisperwood compound in early 2000, they found no individual cult members. Instead, in the central chamber, surrounded by an array of crude surgical tools and biomechanical diagrams, they discovered a single, pulsating, grotesque organic mass. It was multi-limbed, multi-headed, with countless eyes blinking open and shut, and it hummed with a disturbing, intelligent rhythm. It was a singular consciousness spread across many bodies, the horrifying culmination of their flesh-weaving. The entire area has since been quarantined, and locals still tell tales of the mountain heartbeat, a low thrumming sound sometimes heard from deep within the Whisperwood, a sound that feels both alive and utterly wrong. And finally, we come to the most insidious of them all, the cult that never called itself a cult. They were simply known as the Looming Shadows, and their influence spread through existing communities like a spiritual plague, corrupting from within. Their origins trace back to the winter of 1964, when a drifter named Marcus Thorne arrived in the coal town of Bitter Creek, West Virginia. Unlike the typical vagrant seeking work or shelter, Thorne possessed an unsettling quality that locals struggled to articulate. He appeared to be in his 30s, yet spoke with the weariness of someone who had witnessed centuries of suffering. His eyes held a depth that seemed to reflect personal knowledge of every tragedy that had ever occurred in the mountains. What distinguished Thorne from previous cult leaders was his approach. Rather than gathering followers around himself, he sought out individuals who were already broken by loss, addiction, or despair. He would appear at their lowest moments, offering not salvation, but validation of their pain. His message was seductive in its simplicity. Suffering was not meaningless, but sacred, and those who embraced their anguish completely would discover transcendence through perpetual sorrow. The Looming Shadows recruitment process was methodical and deliberate. Thorne would identify vulnerable individuals, often those mourning recent losses or struggling with chronic depression. He would befriend them gradually, never presenting himself as a religious leader, but rather as someone who understood their pain intimately. During these conversations, he would introduce the concept of sacred suffering, suggesting that their emotional torment was actually a gift that connected them to something greater than themselves. Those who showed interest were invited to participate in what Thorne called witnessing circles. These gatherings, held in basements, abandoned buildings, or remote forest clearings, involved participants sharing their most traumatic experiences in excruciating detail. The twist was that listeners were encouraged to absorb and internalize each other's pain, creating a collective pool of suffering that supposedly generated spiritual power. The Looming Shadows' central ritual, known as the Endless Vigil, required participants to maintain a state of active grief for extended periods. Members would fast, sleep-deprive themselves, and engage in psychological techniques designed to keep traumatic memories constantly accessible. They believed that by preventing emotional healing, they could achieve a state of perpetual connection to what they called the source of all sorrow. As the Looming Shadows' influence spread throughout Bitter Creek and neighboring communities, disturbing changes became apparent. Members would withdraw from normal social activities, spending increasing amounts of time in contemplation of loss and pain. Families reported that members seemed to actively seek out traumatic experiences, placing themselves in dangerous situations or deliberately sabotaging positive developments in their lives. The organization's growth pattern was particularly insidious because it operated within existing social structures. Unlike traditional cults that isolated members from their communities, the Looming Shadows encouraged participants to maintain their normal routines while secretly spreading its philosophy. Members were instructed to identify and recruit other suffering individuals, creating a hidden network of people dedicated to perpetuating emotional anguish. Local mental health professionals began noticing alarming trends in the mid-1960s. Suicide rates in affected communities increased dramatically, but more troubling were the reports of individuals who seemed to be deliberately prolonging their psychological suffering. Therapists described patients who would sabotage their own treatment, claiming that healing would disconnect them from something essential. The Looming Shadows' influence extended beyond individual members to affect entire families and social networks. Children of members often displayed signs of severe psychological distress, having been raised in environments where emotional pain was not just normalized, but celebrated. These children were taught that happiness was a form of spiritual weakness, and that true enlightenment required embracing suffering as a permanent state of being. By 1967, the looming shadows had established cells in over 30 communities across West Virginia, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania. Each cell operated independently, but followed the same basic principles: identify the suffering, recruit through empathy, and create networks of individuals committed to perpetuating their own emotional torment. The organization's decentralized structure made it nearly impossible for authorities to combat effectively. The looming shadows practices became increasingly extreme as members competed to demonstrate their commitment to sacred suffering. Some engaged in self-harm, believing that physical pain enhanced their spiritual connection. Others would seek out traumatic experiences, such as visiting accident scenes or funeral homes, to absorb additional anguish. The most dedicated members practiced what they called empathic consumption, attempting to psychically absorb the pain of everyone around them. Marcus Thorne himself remained largely in the background, moving between communities and providing guidance to local leaders. Those who met him described an individual who seemed to embody the very suffering he preached. He reportedly never smiled, spoke in a voice that conveyed infinite sadness, and possessed an uncanny ability to identify and articulate people's deepest fears and regrets. The looming shadow's influence on regional culture was profound and lasting. Communities affected by its presence developed a pervasive atmosphere of hopelessness that persisted long after active cells had disbanded. Local folklore began incorporating themes of inescapable sorrow and the futility of seeking happiness. Even today, certain areas maintain higher-than-average rates of depression and suicide, suggesting that the looming shadow's psychological impact continues to reverberate through generations. The organization's end came not through law enforcement intervention, but through internal collapse. By 1969, many long-term members had descended into complete psychological breakdown, unable to function in normal society. The constant cultivation of suffering had created a population of individuals so damaged that they could no longer effectively recruit new members or maintain the organization's structure. Marcus Thorne disappeared sometime in early 1970, leaving behind only a handwritten note found in an abandoned cabin that read, "The sorrow is complete. The source has been fed. The work continues in those who remain." His fate remains unknown, though some former members claimed he had achieved his goal of becoming pure suffering, transcending physical existence entirely. The looming shadows represents perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated of all Appalachian cults. While other organizations relied on fear, isolation, or promises of supernatural power, the looming shadows exploited the fundamental human experience of emotional pain. Its legacy serves as a reminder that the most dangerous spiritual movements are often those that validate and perpetuate our darkest impulses rather than offering genuine healing or growth. The impact of these 8 cults on Appalachian culture cannot be overstated. They emerged from the unique conditions of geographic isolation, economic hardship, and cultural insularity that characterized the region. But their influence extended far beyond their immediate communities. Each organization left behind a legacy of trauma that continues to affect the descendants of both members and victims, creating generational patterns of fear, mistrust, and psychological damage that persist to this day. These groups didn't just disappear from the mountains. They became part of them, their twisted beliefs seeping into the very roots of the ancient peaks. From the echoes in Whisperwind Hollow to the rhythmic thrumming of the flesh weavers in Whisperwood, each cult discovered that in Appalachia, transcendence always demands a payment. The mountains remember every bargain, every sacrifice, every drop of blood and tear spilled in desperation. And they're still waiting for those debts to be collected. So the next time you find yourself walking alone through those misty hollers, remember that some hungers are older than civilization itself, and they never truly die. They just wait for the next desperate soul willing to make a deal. What chilling detail from these Appalachian cults stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts below.